Chief Justice, and those wanting to keep the court appointment open for the next president have now won a complete victory. President Johnson withdrew Fortas's name last week, and now, today, says he will not nominate anyone else. He suggested that Earl Warren stay on the court as Chief Justice for a while until the Senate's tempers cool. Warren is on the court now and presumably will remain for some time. It is known that Warren dislikes Richard Nixon, and when he resigned, it was said he foresaw a Nixon victory and did not want him as president to name the next Chief Justice, and so resigned in time for Mr. Johnson to name his replacement. If that was the plan, it didn't work. The chances are now that the next president, whoever he is, will have a chance to name replacements not only for Warren, but for perhaps 2 or 3 other members of the court, and so will have a chance to influence its political and philosophical slant for years to come. Tonight, the president makes his first openly or admittedly partisan speech of this year's campaign, a radio broadcast paid for by the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, in which he urges the election of the Humphrey Muskie ticket for president. He taped the speech at the White House this morning, and here's how some of it went.
There are harsh political voices in the air that seek to divide our people and to set them against each other in mutual fear and suspicion. The man who stood at the schoolhouse door defying the law is now pretending to be the apostle of order. I don't believe many Americans will be fooled by that pose. I don't believe many people will be beguiled into thinking that order in a democracy can ever be achieved by empty rhetoric and violent appeals to emotion. Americans are too wise to waste their votes on a false prophet of fear. And neither will they agree with Mr. Wallace when he says there's not a dime's worth of difference between Mr. Nixon and Vice President Humphrey, because the people know the record of both of these candidates. They know that Nixon is the one who cast the tie-breaking vote that killed aid to education back when he was vice president. They know that Nixon is the one who said that Medicare would do more harm than good. And they know that Nixon is the one who speaks for the Republican Party, Mr. Nixon's Republican Party, that always opposes so much vital and progressive legislation. The voters have now heard Mr. Nixon recently call for delay in adopting the treaty against the spread of nuclear weapons, the treaty that we worked for in so many forums for so long a time, though further delay on our part will delay and will jeopardize the acceptance of the treaty by other important nations, I think to the lasting detriment of world peace and to our own American security. The next president will have to face difficult foreign policy issues, just as President Kennedy and I had to face these issues. From what I have observed of Vice President Humphrey over more than 20 years, I believe that he has, in a unique measure, the understanding, the imagination, the commitment to freedom that this responsibility requires. I know of his love for this country. It is deep and it is genuine. I know of his great capacity to do good. It is endless. I believe that his new responsibilities as president will enable both him and our country to achieve a new greatness. And I look forward to the day when Hubert Humphrey will assume the splendid misery, the burdens, and the magnificent opportunities of President of the United States.
A new Gallup poll published today shows Richard Nixon with a substantial lead, Humphrey pretty well behind for second place, and George Wallace not far behind him in third place. It was the first time since Wallace became a candidate that he has not risen in the polls. This time, he not only didn't rise, but he lost 1 point. That apparently was what prompted him to say yesterday, knowing this was coming, to charge the polls were rigged against him. The Christian Science Monitor says a coast-to-coast survey it has made shows Nixon winning and Wallace coming second and Humphrey third. That's in electoral votes. They said it appeared Humphrey would win only 4 states and the District of Columbia. There was the usual precaution that this was a month before the election, and these figures obviously could change.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by Woolite Cold Water Wash. Safely soak sweaters clean in 3 minutes without stretching or fading, and make sweaters really look alive. Woolite.
You'll look better in a sweater washed in Woolite. Woolite washing makes a sweater look alive.
Woolite and cold water safely soak sweaters clean in 3 minutes. No shrinking, no fading. That's why the makers of over 20 million sweaters recommend Woolite.
You'll look better in a sweater washed in Woolite.
Try cold water Woolite and look alive.
Now, the fastest relief known for bronchial asthma attacks can restore free breathing in as little as 15 seconds. It's new Primatene Mist. Used as directed, Primatene Mist instantly delivers medication deep into congested lungs, opens breathing passages, relaxes bronchial spasms, so asthma attack is relieved fast. Get new Primatene Mist. Restores free breathing in as little as 15 seconds.
The House voted yesterday to change the law to make possible television debates among the major candidates. NBC, CBS, and ABC then offered to make the arrangements with Nixon, Humphrey, and Wallace. But today, when the question came up in the Senate, the Republicans dug in their heels, did everything they could to kill it, including threatening a filibuster, and they succeeded. They killed it. The Democratic leadership of the Senate gave up and said in the face of all that opposition, they would not push the bill because there wasn't enough time left. And so that was that. The law now will not be changed, and there will not be any debates. George Wallace announced he was sending his vice presidential candidate, General Curtis LeMay, to Vietnam on an inspection trip. He said LeMay would come back and report to him, and he, Wallace, would then report to the American people. Jen?
Dr. Wernher von Braun, and the man most responsible for the United States space rocket program, predicted today that it's entirely possible that this country will try to land men on the moon sometime next fall. But he laid down 2 important conditions for such an event. The first is that tomorrow's Apollo 7 launch must be perfect in all respects, from liftoff to splashdown in 11 days. And the second is that the Apollo 8 manned flight, so far scheduled for December, must be made to orbit the moon and return safely to Earth. The final countdown for Apollo 7 began shortly before 3 o'clock this afternoon, and von Braun said he has never seen preparations so smoothly carried out. As he put it, everything is right on the money. Procedures have clicked off like a charm. Today also, the Apollo crew, Walter Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham, were given their final briefing before the flight. They had an early dinner, and they're to be in bed before 10 o'clock. NBC television will cover the launch beginning at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. David?
About 5 years after President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas with a mail-order rifle, Congress today got around to outlawing the sale of firearms by mail. There'd been a lot of pulling and hauling, lobbying and arguing, and what came today was a compromise. It is a law to stop the sale of pistols, rifles, shotguns, and ammunition by mail, and to stop all sales to felons, drug addicts, and mental cases where they can be identified. President Johnson asked that all guns be registered and all their owners licensed, but Congress refused. It did vote this much today to stop mail-order sales. It was the first time it had put any new restrictions on firearms since the bootlegger days of gangsters and machine guns, when it outlawed the ownership of machine guns. Senator McClellan's committee spent another day inquiring into the use of poverty money for young people's groups or gangs in the ghettos, including the Blackstone Rangers in Chicago and what was called the Woodlawn Project. Bertram Harding, the head of the Poverty Office, was the witness.
In spite of all of the acknowledged problems with the experiment, there have been some positive results. Significant numbers of Woodlawn out-of-school youth were given an opportunity and an alternative for the first time in their lives. Several now have friends working in a factory. not just hanging around on a street corner. More than 60 out of an initial placement of 100 are earning an honest wage averaging over $2.25 an hour. Many of these youth appear to be breaking away from the heavy dependency on the gang simply because they are now working constructively at a job 8 hours a day rather than working destructively during that time within the gang. We do have this terrible dropout problem. We do have this terrible teenage violence problem. This is a factual situation with which governments at all levels are faced. Our approach to this really is to try to find ways of helping in that situation, eliminating the present conditions, and I do not know why we have it.
Life's more interesting when there's a white owl around, like the handsome White Owl New Yorker. A blend of choice tobacco gives the New Yorker a mild, full flavor that lifts a man's spirits. Of the New Yorker, the cigar that makes life more interesting.
You get a lot more from a White Owl than just smoke.
The foreign minister of Egypt complained to the United Nations about the U.S. plan to sell fighter bombers to Israel. He said American warplanes and weapons would not bring peace to the Middle East, but simply make Israel more aggressive. South Vietnamese President Tu went on radio and television and denied the reports of a coup against him and his government. He said there had been no arrests, and he blamed the communists for these reports. The U.S. command in Saigon said 190 Americans were killed in action last week. That was the lowest number in 7 weeks. 322 South Vietnamese were killed, and the enemy dead was said to be 1,654. The bombing of North Vietnam continues to be an issue in several political campaigns in this country. An example is the bid for re-election by George McGovern, one of the Senate's more vocal doves. NBC News correspondent Sander Van Oka reports on his race and McGovern's criticism of the bombing.
I want to say as a bomber pilot in World War II that it doesn't do very much good to bomb a rice field or to drop bombs on a primitive agricultural country like Vietnam. We haven't protected our men in the South with the bombing. This is the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. We haven't saved the lives of American troops in the South by bombing the North.
George McGovern achieved stature in this country and perhaps the world by being a U.S. senator who spoke out early and consistently against the war in Vietnam. But here in South Dakota, where Democrats are rarely elected to the Senate, what McGovern has said and done about agriculture is more important to the voters than even what he has said about Vietnam. This is supposed to be the most agricultural state in the country. The fact that McGovern is a member of the Agriculture Committee in the Senate has helped him in this state far more than the fact that he was a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. In fact, in some places in South Dakota, this knowledge causes no stir at all.
Good to be here, too.
McGovern, seeking a second term, is opposed by Archie Gubrud, a farmer who was governor from 1961 to 65. He was, by all accounts, a fairly popular governor because he didn't change things too much. He looks like, he talks like just what he is, a farmer who has worked very hard all his life. He talks about a number of themes: Vietnam, financial responsibility, farm prices, and the inevitable issue, law and order.
We've seen a steadily rising crime rate. It's going up much higher than our rise in population, with the resulting riots, looting, burning, and things like that that should never happen in a country such as this that has always prided itself on being the land of law and order.
McGovern talks about law and order too, but in a different way.
You cannot separate the problems of unrest and overcrowding and congestion in the great cities from part of its source out here in agricultural America. Now, this is the message that I think those of us from farm states have to get across to our colleagues in the House and in the Senate who represent urban areas.
This is a Republican state, a conservative state, where registered Republicans outnumber Democrats by 175,000 to 125,000. So Gubrud continues to emphasize those things which he thinks will please the majority in South Dakota.
I think the present junior senator, we all know, was a prominent part of the Stop Humphrey movement. And I don't care what he comes out here to Sioux Falls and says, Humphrey hasn't forgotten that. And I think he has seriously hurt his effectiveness in the event Humphrey gets elected. And it isn't hard to figure out that if Nixon is elected, his voice is going to be even weaker.
Just a few months ago, George McGovern was as popular with the voters of South Dakota as he has been with the children at this Indian school this afternoon, and all the polls reflected this. Then he became a candidate for the presidency, and he slipped badly. Perhaps this was because he was out of the state campaigning for the Democratic nomination, or because he sought the nomination, or more likely because voters in this state did not like what they saw on television from Chicago, and they identified McGovern with that which they didn't like. Lately, however, he has gained in the polls, and he seems to be showing his old strength. But his problem remains the problem of all Democratic senatorial incumbents. And that is, will his strength be enough to overcome the discontent we have seen all over the country and the possible tendency of voters to take out this discontent against the incumbent? Of those we have seen thus far, George McGovern seems the Democrat with the best chance of bucking this trend. But it is not going to be easy.
Leave your feeling of tension behind and step into a quiet world. Take Quiet World tablets. You can feel calmer, more relaxed. Quiet World is the new modern calmative. Each Quiet World tablet contains special calming and tension-relieving ingredients to help you feel relaxed, more peaceful. After all, we didn't call it Quiet World for nothing.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by Digel, the extra action antacid for more complete indigestion relief. Pleasant tasting tablets or liquid.
Baby's upset tummy and yours have a lot in common. It's a well-known medical fact that eating too much or too fast can cause pressure and gas. Here's the best solution for baby. For you, Digel, the extra action antacid. Digel not only neutralizes excess acid, it has the extra action of simethicone that breaks up bubbles of gas. Helps you feel better fast. When you eat too well, demand Digel.
The Detroit Tigers became the world champions today by beating the Cardinals in St. Louis in the 7th game of the World Series. The score was 4-1. The Tigers' Mickey Lolich won his 3rd game of the series, beating the Cardinals' best pitcher, Bob Gibson. Gibson had a shutout for 6 innings, but he wore out in the 7th. After getting 2 men out, he gave up 2 singles, and then Detroit's center fielder, Jim Northrup, came to bat.
Northrup hits the ball to all fields. Fly ball, Flood. Hey, almost on. He misjudges it over his head. 2 runs are going to score.
The Tigers scored again in the 7th inning and got another run in the 9th for the 4-0 lead. Lolich kept his shutout going into the 9th. With 2 out, Cardinal third baseman Mike Shannon was the batter.
There's a long drive. Back near the wall, Northrup, but it's out of here for a home run.
That made it 4-1 for Detroit. Cardinals catcher Tim McCarver was up next.
McCarver pops up. Here's 3 in. Detroit's the new world champion. And look at Friend picking up Lolich.
And that was how it ended, and here's how the city of Detroit reacted to its first championship in 28 years.
Advance reservations? Check. Children under 12, free in your room. Check.
Are we going to stay, Grandpa?
Check.
Check. Check.
Check one Holiday Inn, and you check them all. There are now over 1,000 Holiday Inns with #1 service at a sensible price, where you're #1.
There was a report in a Korean newspaper that the crew of the Pueblo might soon be released by North Korea. Secretary of State Rusk denied it. He said in the negotiations with North Korea there had been no progress. Rusk also said the Western allies will have to examine Russia's invasion of Czechoslovakia and its military action in Eastern Europe soberly and in detail. Sources in Prague said the Kremlin has offered to sign a treaty guaranteeing the withdrawal of a number of troops from Czechoslovakia. In Moscow, the prosecution asked today that 2 of the 5 Russians on trial for protesting the invasion of Czechoslovakia be banished to some remote area, such as Siberia. One of these defendants is the grandson of a former Russian foreign minister. On a British warship off Gibraltar, British Prime Minister Wilson and Rhodesia's Prime Minister Smith continued their talks and made no progress. Prices fell today in heavy trading on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Industrials lost almost 6.5 points, and an average share of common stock lost 21 cents. Chet?
Walter Schirra, the commander of the Apollo 7 mission, is 45, a captain in the Navy. And if the spacecraft is launched tomorrow, he will be the only man to have flown in space 3 times. He flew 1 Mercury mission and 1 Gemini mission. Recently, NBC News correspondent Frank McGee interviewed Schirra at the Space Center in Houston and asked him what he thought was the relevance of the space program in view of so many other demands on the country.
We've devoted a large portion of our economy to the space budget. We've suffered financial losses due to the conflict we're engaged in. It's eating into our economy. Is the space program also eating into our economy? Can we afford all these things is what you're asking, I assume.
And I think a great many other people are.
I'd say yes, it is. If we're that small that we can't afford to continue something we've tried, if we build up this massive complex, the complex that we can see here, for example, this is one small fraction of it. About 90% of our space budget is actually spent in industry. This is just the research center here and the control center. We're doing something for the world and the country. Now, I feel what we're doing is exploiting man's capability to advance in technology. If that sounds long, I think that's what it is, because the space program is long. We have creative people who have determined that they can do things The old cliche about why do you climb a mountain? Because it's there isn't very satisfactory to other people. Why do you go to the moon? I say we go to the moon because we know we can go there, not because it's there. In the beginning, we were exploring. We were trying to see if we could get man into space. We did that. And then we added to it the fun of it. The Gemini was the fun of it. It was a fun vehicle. It was a spirited little thing. You could zip around and felt like a fighter airplane.
Yeah.
Now we've got a big bomber. This is a big moose of a vehicle, and it has within it a lot of complex systems and backup systems that cause much more detailed inspection. So the pressures start to build on you a little bit more, and you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So you find it's a little more difficult to perform.
I wonder, has any thought been given to establishing a cutoff age beyond which astronauts would not be allowed to make space flights?
I suspect I'll be the test case, at least. I am, of course, the oldest of our working crew. I think also I'll probably volunteer to cut off myself. And I think that this flight has proved something to me. It's very demanding. Possibly the word drudgery, the sheer drudgery. Some things are, some very long days are involved, the meetings and the sessions we've had trying to resolve some of the problems we have. The emotional trauma is another one. And it all eats into you. It takes it away. There's no doubt about it. And as a result, you don't bounce back as fast. That, of course, comes with age as well, I suspect. But there are plenty of people flying airplanes around that have more responsibility than I have, as I judge it.
Mm-hmm.
The man who has 150 to 200 passengers in back has a heck of a responsibility. And those men are flying in their 60s.
So no cutoff age as yet?
I don't see a cutoff age as such.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have that many flights coming up just yet, so I probably will not have another flight right away.
This is likely then to be your last flight?
I suspect it will.
Chirac is an extraordinarily well-composed man. Yesterday, 2 days before the scheduled launch, he went dove hunting with friends. Good night, David.
Good night, Chet, and good night for NBC News.
I'd like you to meet a handsome family. This is Millie, our pride and joy, and these are her 2 sons. What characters. You know, I've brought up a lot of dogs, and I'm often asked about feeding. Everybody knows dogs need meat. Alpo is 100% meat, and that's why so many veterinarians recommend Alpo. Other dog foods know meat is important too. That's why so many of them use words like meaty flavor or beefy or meat flavored. But actually, most dog foods are mainly cereal. That's right, mainly cereal. Some up to 70% cereal. Not Alpo. Alpo is 100% meat, not a speck of cereal. Here, Millie. Ladies first. My dogs like all 6 kinds. Alpo beef, chicken, horse meat, liver, lamb, and veal. They cost a little more, naturally. Meat costs more than cereal. See what happens to your dog when you switch him to Alpo.